Hello, my name's Connell Fullenkamp. I teach economics and finance at Duke University. This is the Allen Resources problem-solving video for Level 1. Our topic is quantitative methods. Now, before I get into solving problems and actually looking at all the numbers, what I'd like to do is share some tips and some rules with you about problem solving to try to make the job easier for you. In my experience as an instructor for, I guess, over 10 years, I've come across some strategies that I'd like to share with you and that I think that you'll find helpful as well. I've written them down as a series of tips or rules, if you will, and so I'd like to start by going over those. So let's look at the board that I've prepared and in which I've put down some of these rules. The first rule is to know the formulas, and I've underlined know because it's extremely important. You've got to know them cold. Now, that means that you're going to have to do a lot of memorization, and I realize that's not a fun job, but it's something that has to get done. So to help you do that, I think it's very important to make study aids. Study aids can be things like a formula sheet or flashcards or anything really that helps you remember what the formulas are. If you do that, then that will help you very much when you encounter the problems. And the act of writing things down and making the study aids actually does help you remember these formulas later on. Now, for people who are particularly nervous about remembering all the formulas, there's a technique that I've recommended to my students that seems to work pretty well. I call it the memory dump technique. In the memory dump technique, the first thing you do in the exam, even before you open the booklet and look at the first problem, is you take out a clean sheet of paper and you write down every single formula that you can remember. It doesn't matter if you can't remember all of the formulas at once. What does matter is that you write down everything you can remember right away at the start of the exam. That takes the pressure off you, and then as you remember more formulas, you can go back to the list and add them later, and then you can keep referring back to that sheet throughout the exam. And every time you get stumped, you can go back over to your formula sheet that you've made on the spot inside the exam and look it over and see if that can help you solve some of the problems. So in those ways, that will help you know the formulas, and that is always the starting point in problem solving. The second rule is know your tools. So let's look at what I've written down under that. Got to know your tools. Well, what are your tools for problem solving in quantitative methods? First and foremost, that financial calculator. And by the way, throughout this video, I'll be using the abbreviation CALC for calculator. But you've got to know your particular financial calculator and how to use the important functions on it, because you'll be using it a lot. So get out that instruction manual, look at other resources like other teaching videos about how to use that financial calculator, and really know and understand how to use it so you're comfortable with it. And by the way, if the batteries in that financial calculator are a little bit stale, either put brand new batteries in before you come to the exam or have batteries with you, because in my experience in teaching quantitative-based courses, there's always somebody whose batteries run out right before the exam, and that is not a place that you want to be. So please do that. Take care of your tools, I guess, is another thing that we can put that under. The second tool that you're going to be using a lot in quantitative methods are statistical tables. And every statistical table is put together slightly differently. So you've got to familiarize yourself with the statistical tables that are going to be provided and know how to use those and how to interpret them. So those are the main tools. Of course, the other tools are just the brain tools like the algebra that you're going to have to bring to the table. But know these tools and know how to use them. Another rule that I've written down below knowing your tools is making notes and drawing pictures. In quantitative methods, you're going to be doing a lot of problem solving that are basically word problems. And so if you make notes to yourself to remind you about what's going on and what you're being asked, and drawing pictures to help you visualize what's going on, you're going to do a lot better. So as you practice the problems and as you follow along in the problems that I'm solving, it would help that if you would take notes of yourself to remind you of things, of facts that you think are important, and to draw little pictures. These are techniques that are not valuable not just for people taking exams, but these are what professionals do on the job all the time as well when they're trying to solve a tricky problem. The goal in applying these rules is to get to the point that I call a plug and chug problem. What does plug and chug mean? Well, let's take a look at the slide and I'll tell you. So our goal is to turn every problem that you encounter from some kind of a confusing word problem into a straight plug and chug problem. That means that first you recognize what in the world is being asked of you. In other words, you need to ask yourself, which formula does the question refer to? Which formula am I going to need to apply? And sometimes it might be several formulas. The second thing is, which variables in that formula am I being asked to calculate or to solve for? So the first step, of course, in these problems is always to recognize what is being asked of you, and that means knowing those formulas again and knowing the variables in the formula. So again, you can see how important it is to come into the exam knowing the formulas very, very well. Once you recognize what is being asked, then you can set it up, and that's the second step. And then once you have it set up, then it's just plug and chug, or in other words, just solving for the variable or variables that are remaining to be solved for. So the goal is to take a complicated, confusing problem, to break it down into several steps, turn it into plug and chug, which is always the easiest way to solve a problem. All right, so those are the basic rules for problem solving that I want you to be aware of and to keep in mind as you look at the problems that I'm going to be going over. Let me tell you about what I'm going to try to do in this video. And I've got it written down on the sheet, and I'll try to explain the steps. So what we'll do in this video is to pose a problem. And when I pose a problem, I'm going to write out, again, a hairy word problem that looks at first like it might be difficult to solve. After that, I'm going to go through the steps that I've just talked about. I'm going to try to recognize that problem, recognize what is being asked. Then I'm going to set it up, and then I'm just going to plug and chug my way through it. So hopefully, as you use this video, what you can do is to stop the video after I pose the problem and maybe try to work the problem yourself. Ask yourself, what's being asked of me? What formulas might I need to be using here? And then maybe even try to set it up yourself and plug and chug your way through it. And then you can go and use the video to watch me as I plug and chug my way through it, and hopefully we both get at the same answer. So let's start by solving some problems in Level 1, Study Session 2, Investment Tools. Of course, we're going to start with time value of money. So let's look at a typical time value of money problem. We're going to be solving a lot of them. So let's look at the board. I've got a problem written out. How much will $1,800,000 be worth 261 days from today if R is 0.0392 or 3.92%? Well, if we look at this problem immediately, you can recognize that this is thinking about a future value of a single sum of money. So right below the problem, I've got some of the intuition and the solution to the problem written down. So let's take a look at that. So I've got starred, and I'll always try to star the inside about the problem recognition. Future value of a single sum. Now, we could write down the formula for this, but it's not necessary because we have financial calculators. And as I've said before, you know your tools. You know how to plug the numbers in and compute the answers for them. So what I'm going to tell you in these present time value of money problems is I'm going to tell you the entries that you would use in your financial calculator, expecting that you know how to enter these numbers and how to compute the solution using the particular financial calculator that you have. So let's look below at the problem where I've got written down the particulars of the calculation. For present value, I plug in the single sum. For the I over Y, interest rate per year is 3.92. And remember that the interest rate is always entered in percents itself. Remember that the periods per year is set to 1, and that N is going to be equal to 261 over 365 because there are 261 days out of a 365-day year until you want to calculate this future value. Remember that since you've got I over Y in terms of years and P over Y in terms of years, that your time has to be in terms of years also. So let's look and see how that calculation came out. I got that the future value was equal to $1,850,178.85 and 0.085 cents. Let's go to another problem. Again, still with time value of money. So I've got the problem written down. The answer to the previous one, I've tried to separate it with a squiggly line, which of course is every professor's symbol of dividing the thought process. I just made that up. Today is March 31st, 2004. On March 31st, 2006, you'll receive $200,000. What's the value on March 31st, 2009 if the interest rate is 6.25%? So this is another time value of money problem dealing with future value, except that the future is even after the occurrence of the cash flow. So let's see how we would solve that. At this point, it's a good time to introduce the timeline, which is a graphical tool that we often use in time value of money problems to help us figure out what's going on and how to solve these problems. So let's look at the board and see what I've written down. First, I've acknowledged that this is another future value of a single sum problem. And underneath it, I've written down a timeline. And of course, on the timeline, I have on top the cash flows that I'm thinking about in this problem. And on the bottom, I have the time periods that are under consideration.